going to be my stop block. Well, some of it anyway.
To make the stop block, I'm using some 20cm by 10cm pine that was originally untreated railway sleeper. I cut it down to about 10cm by 10cm on my mitre saw. Using the trench cutting feature on the saw, I cut the block into an L shape that I'm going to use as the actual shape for the stop block. Stop block's going to have a spline in it that's going to run along the T-track. For the spline itself, I'm going to use this piece of 40mm oak worktop that I've got. It should mean that the spline's nice and solid. I'm going to cut it down to size in a sec, and then we'll go from there. The width of the groove in the T-track's 9mm long, so I cut a piece of the oak 9mm wide on my mitre saw. I only want the spline to protrude into the T-track about 6mm, so I rip it down on the table saw. I need to cut the groove in the stop block itself to accept the spline, so I make a number of passes on the table saw, adjusting the fence to move the cuts to the desired width so I can actually fit the spline in it. The last thing to then do with the spline is to mark it and trim it to the appropriate length to exactly match the stop block. The spline's to be glued into the stop block, but before I do, I check it's running smoothly inside the T-track. If it needs any adjusting, I just sand it down, but I was actually quite lucky that it didn't. It needs to be a nice snug fit, you don't want it moving about. I use some standard PVA wood glue to glue the spline in, clamp it, and then leave it overnight. Using my pillar drill, I drill an 8mm hole for the M8 bolt that's going to go through and sit in the T-track. Using a saw, I notch out where the bolt needs to sit. And then chisel out the excess material. I need to get better at chiseling, really. Deliberately cut the stop block a little bit high for the fence, so I mark it and then cut it down with my mitre saw. I need to create a lip on the top of the stop block, so I use a piece of the oak that I use for the spline and glue it to the top to create the lip. I'm using a piece of 2mm acrylic to use as my marking line. I cut it down on my mitre saw using some plywood to sandwich it to stop tear out. Using some double-sided tape, I stick the acrylic to the top of the stop block. and then drill 2 holes using the pillar drill through the acrylic and into the stop block. These are where the screws are going to go to hold the acrylic to the top of the stop block. In order to dial in the measurements, I need the holes in the acrylic to be bigger than the holes in the stop block so I can move it from side to side. So I use my pillar drill to enlarge the holes and then use a file to get them to the desired widths. Finally, I scribe a line at what will be 90 degrees to the face of the stop block. Then using some red whiteboard marker, I draw into the line, wipe off the excess, and that will give me a nice crisp red line. I can then screw gently the acrylic into the top of the stop block, and as you can see, it enables it to be moved from left to right but still remain at 90 degrees to the face of the stop block. To calibrate the stop block, I use a piece of timber that I know is exactly 45 centimeters. I butt the stop block up to it and then mark on the fence where I want to align the stop block. I then make a more prominent mark and line up my tape measure inside the rebate that I cut with the 45 centimeter mark aligned to the mark I've made. Through a bit of trial and error, I can then exactly dial in the stop block to meet the dimensions that the saw is cutting to. With everything calibrated, it's now time for a test cut.
Bang on 60 centimetres.
That's the end of the video. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, please feel free to give it a thumbs down. But if you do give it a thumbs down, let me know how I can improve it. Hopefully see you again soon.